Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Democratic View. I'm the hostess, and my name is Phyllis Italiano. And with me today, I have, I would say, probably the smartest guy I know on the East End. And I really believe that.
Scary thought.
I know you're going to laugh at that, but I really believe that.
Me and lots of other people, but
Besides being a paisano as well,
Right.
of course. Anyway, his name is Bob DeLuca, and he is the president of the group for the East End. And he's the guy who I always have to say, tell me what's happening here. Bring us up to date on our group for our East End.
and it's been a while, right? I mean,
Yes, it
we
has.
haven't. It's good that we can be back together again, which is
Yes.
nice. And we're, it's interesting how not being, you don't think of it, but I know even like this whole year of doing Zoom meetings and everything, you almost need to remember how it is to be with people, like in business settings and stuff. I find myself, it took me a while when I started getting back around the table with people to not be having my cup of coffee and whatever else I was doing on my Zoom meetings, So anyway, I'm glad to be back joining among the living here, and thankfully many people have gotten through this, and hopefully we'll stay in the right trajectory. So. But it's also been interesting in terms of, what we do, because we had a 12-month experience of what's normally our summer experience because people came here. And it's so great, by the way, that we have a place that people come to for refuge. And I think a lot of people found the beauty of this place. I won't say for the first time, but I think a lot of people, particularly when, and I know this from people that I've talked to, when there really weren't other recreational activities that people could do, many more people found their way outside to a trail, to a beach, take a walk, go for a run, ride a bike.
Yeah, yeah.
And
you see them all over the streets.
Yeah, and it's great that people were able to take advantage of those things that, fortunately, many of our towns on the East End have been trying to protect for a long time. So we have those resources, such that they are, and obviously some of them are heavily used, and I was picking up face masks along the trails, but for the most part, I think it was great that people could, and I think people developed maybe a deeper experience in some ways. And there was other, terrible things going on for people, and it provided some respite for that as well. When you kind of shift the optics to, what does that mean environmentally?
Yeah.
Well,
That's the key.
when we were talking earlier, there's always been a sense out here that when you hit, even if it's not Labor Day, when you hit Columbus Day and then really until the spring, there's this deep breath when the traffic comes down and it's just easier to go places and do things, and the earth has an opportunity to kind of rebound and reset. And for not just us, but I think a lot of vacation communities, that's fairly typical, right? Mountain communities and places like this. This really was a year where we saw what it looks like when your population here on the South Fork is probably well over 100,000, maybe 120,000, something like that, similar to a summer population, at least for a good part of this. And we begin thinking about what does that mean for us? And also in terms of a lot of people aren't going back, what does that mean about sewage? What does it mean about traffic? How much more water did we consume last year than in prior years? Because that recovery period has always been just kind of accepted and taken for granted. Okay, if we have a dry year and the water is down, and if nobody's here for a while, it has a chance to build back up, which means our wells will, stay functional. One of the things we know very specifically that was happening is that a lot of old septic systems that were kind of on their last legs anyway, were now receiving daily flow, and they went. I mean, I think the county experienced this countywide, several thousand failures of domestic wastewater systems that just couldn't take it anymore. And we know we're trying to get ahead of that curve by changing out our septic systems. And so, little things like that, you start to think, how many hundreds of thousands of pounds are we producing in terms of nitrogen? We know that the nitrogen getting into our surface waters is a problem. So, it's a little sobering to think that if the day comes when that full population is here on a year-round basis, what will be the environmental stresses that we face, particularly because you want to keep those experiences for people to be out in nature, as you do, to swim almost every day, right?
Every day, not almost.
Every day?
Every day.
And you want to do it in clean water and so forth. So, we have been looking a little bit at that and just trying to figure out what does that tell us about the future, and how do we, with the remainder of land that's available, with the development projects that are coming in, how do you kind of factor that in? And then you and I were also talking a little bit before about, sea level rise and, what is going to happen there and how does that affect things? And, it will affect our region, and we know it's on the way, and we know it's beginning to have effects. And I think it's hard for people to really understand what that looks like, because historically we've seen environmental events, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen winter storms, things that come and go, and they can do a lot of damage. A 38 hurricane you won't soon forget. But it's an event. And sea level rise is different because it's a condition. In other words, that ocean being higher is now a fixed position. So all the various things that happen only go back to that fixed position. And it's very hard for people, and I'm very sympathetic to how difficult it is in your mind's eye to imagine a coastal environment like we have here with the ocean and bay reset to a different position. And what does that mean with the next series of coastal storms, right? Because if everything is higher, and something like a nor'easter where you could have several days of incoming tides that can't get out because of the east of the wind, we have a lot still to learn, but we also have a lot to be thinking about in terms of how we approach this.
It's just...
So in all my time in the pandemic, that's what we were sitting thinking about.
Well, it's mind-boggling, really. It really is mind-boggling. As I tell you, is that I swim in a particular place in Maidstone Park, and I pass by, a whole bunch of, the area where swampy is and the green, and I'm always looking to see how high the water is, and it is getting higher.
Well, it is, and it's sometimes hard to eyeball it because you have natural fluctuations in the daily tide cycles or whatever else is going on, but you're starting to see that this is happening, and it's happening in different places at different paces. But, we are, Montauk's just a great example, and that's not necessarily just sea level rise, but the challenges that exist in a coastal environment where you have development close to a shoreline. And, you can have a lot of debate about this, but one thing we know is that there's probably going to be less shoreline over time as the water comes in. So how much, how fast, those things, are still a little tough to exactly figure out. But if you have an economy that's built on certain uses and trying to figure out how you're going to have that sustain into the future, this is the time, if you haven't thought about it before. And the other thing, it's not to think that it's very difficult to figure out what to do. And I just think about Montauk just as an example. Like, you have this business center there, you have, all the economy that's based there. But if you just step back and look down the bowl of where all the development is in Montauk, it's like a freeway for the next major storm. And it's happened before, right? So how do you deal with that? Or do you just kind of take your chances? And I get that a little bit too, which is to say, well, I don't really know what to do, and doing it's cost money, and we don't have the money, and how do we get the money, and then we have to move stuff around. But, maybe we'll get lucky for 20 years. I don't know. But, you could get the same big storm 2 years in a row, which also has happened. So we're approaching one of those moments, those inflection points, I think, where we're really pivoting toward, there's not, when I started at the group, it was 29 years ago. And God knows there were things going on. But there was kind of a more even keel about like how much land was left and how much we were trying to save and what was getting developed. And now it's kind of more like we're really, in cases like East Hampton, you're really down to, you can't solve this problem by just buying land anymore, right? There's just not enough land to dilute the footprint of human development.
There's not enough land left to buy.
And the town of East Hampton, by the way, has done a great job with something like 50%, and not just the town, but the state parks and all. It's something like 50% of the town of East Hampton has been preserved, and people would think like, that's got to be like, who does that? Like, it must be fine. And yet, what do we have? We have water quality problems, we have surface water problems, we have septic problems, traffic problems, garbage problems. So the area is very sensitive, and our ability to stand on it for the future sustainably is really a challenge, I think, for the next decade. And if we don't get it right, or we don't get as close as we can to getting it right, then you magnify the impacts down the road, right? Whatever those impacts are. And I don't presume to know what they all are, but I can tell you over the 30 years that I've been doing this, the longer you wait, the worse things usually get, the more expensive they are to fix, and the more agony that people go through in making those decisions, whether it's, you know, moving houses or dealing with storm, you know, damage or all these things. And I don't presume to think that this is an easy job, but I think what I can do from my position is to say how important it is, because the other amazing thing we have out here is a constituency across the board, this is the entire East End, all 5 towns, that sees the environmental resource here as something worth protecting. It's always been that way. I mean, and I think that's why organizations like mine can exist. And the leadership in all of these towns, by and large, not all, but for a very, you know, by and large, have always felt that that resource was a resource that embodied the essence of the East End and was worth protecting. Now, mind you, with that, with all that we've done, we're still kind of on the knife's edge here. So it just speaks to the sensitivity of trying to live on this tiny little, sort of the thin end of the island's wedge. And, you know, the work that's involved. Now, I would also say on the other side, which I try not to be gloomy about it, which is I also feel we may have the best public sentiment about this than we have in many other. You know, you go to some places and there are so many other problems that, you know, the environment's nice, but I mean, if you're like, and I see this like when I deal with the Suffolk County legislature, you know, a legislator from Western Suffolk County may have umpteen number of problems from, you know, traffic lights and, you know, all kinds of things going on, and there is no place to put anything, and, you know, contamination from legacy industrial processing. We still have the blessing of a landscape that people adore. We still have the blessing of leadership around this region that gets it. And we have the blessing of a population that by and large gets it. So those things give me a lot of hope. And over the years, I think I could not do this work but for the fact that, you know, we've seen, you know, Community Preservation Fund, Peconic Estuary Program. We've seen very significant changes in zoning to help us better protect our aquifer. That happened because the public said it was okay to happen. You know, leadership in town government doesn't just decide one day to do something. People do have to support it. So we have that going for us, and I like to look at that as the reason why, you know, you got to get up and put your boots on the next day and keep at it.
So, I mean, do you think we'll make it?
You know, look, it's probably above my pay grade to figure out like what the end result is for us here, but I do think this. I think that we have a very good shot at finding a way to sustainably live on the East End. Now, I also think we've probably overshot the most conservative capacity that we have. You know, in other words, there's, you know, I can't think of you the number of how much we should have protected to have these problems go away, but we have pushed this ecosystem, we've pushed this environment to the point, and I think the water quality issue is maybe the best indicator of that, right? Because
Yes.
the rising problems with surface water in our region, whether it's coastal embayments, whether it's freshwater ponds, Hook Pond, Town Pond, Georgica Pond, right? Lake Agawam, you pick. Those just tell us what's happening, and what's happening is we have delayed a very long time in addressing these issues, and that's not uncommon, but we have, and now the bill is coming due, and if the things that we came here for we want to protect, you know, we have to put our shoulders into it, and everybody has to be a little bit of an environmental advocate, because you know, environmental organizations exist to help protect the environment, but we can do nothing without public sentiment that says, yeah, that's the right thing to do. You know, let these guys figure out some of the details, but we are on board with that. And that's when you start to get leadership to say, okay, people, we can make some changes here. Now, we're also pretty far down the track in terms of our development patterns, so that makes things a little more complicated because this place is largely built out. And so now we're talking more about retrofitting the system that we have in a way to make it more functional, right, and more sustainable over time. Biggest thing we can probably do there is starting with wastewater and septic systems, which people like you I know are very interested in, and others. And the county of Suffolk, I have to say, has done a good job in sort of now getting to the point where all new construction needs to have systems that basically better treat nitrogen. Town of East Hampton, the town of Southampton have both been, you know, leaders in that effort, starting to make a difference, you know, in terms of getting those systems in the ground. So that's a big one. and there is positive motion in the right direction. Now, should we go faster? Yes. Should there be more money? Yes. Do we need a recurring revenue stream that all the towns can basically benefit from? Yeah. So we know what the work is, but the foundation, at least in that case, is, it's starting to take shape. And we also have, great research institutions like Stony Brook and the work that Chris Gobler and his crew has done to study these issues, right? A lot of places don't have any of that. Like, a lot of places have the problem, but they don't have a lot of people invested in the solution. So we do have that. It's not going to be easy, but we are unique in that way. The East End is a special place, and most people that come here know that. And so that gives me hope, But every day it does feel like a
Well, it gives me hope too, but I also know that progress moves very slowly.
Yeah, and environmental damage can move very quickly.
Yeah,
So
right.
there was a professor from Dartmouth. Her name was Danella Meadows, and she wrote a series of essays that were compiled into a book called The Global Citizen that I used to use in the course that I taught.
What's it called? Global
Citizen?
Yeah.
It was Island Press. I don't know that it's even still in print, but I used to use that book because she wrote these very simple and clear-cut essays just about the kinds of, how do you get into these problems, how do you fix them. One of the things that she pointed out very early on is that the political system loves to believe that relationships are kind of long-term, linear. It gets a little bit worse over time. So 30 years from now, we can predict that we'll have this much more of an increase in the problem. And yet over and over again, biological systems will tell you that they don't act that way, right? They may act this way, where you see a little problem and then,
Yeah.
and political systems, very difficult, right? Because things take time to change and fund and leadership and all that. So this was like a primary conflict that she identified, and I think she was dead on, which is when you come to somebody and you say there's going to be a problem in 3 to 5 years and we have to do something about it, but it's not a problem yet. And the problem looks like it's been creeping along, not so bad, not so bad. People are like, why don't we just let that wait and fix that thing over there, which seems to be a problem today. I get it. Natural systems, as we've seen with the water quality issue, like you're okay, and then boom, you're not okay. So I think it's hard to embrace that way of thinking in political decision-making and leadership, but we have to start looking at the things that we know are going to cause us very significant problems, and we don't know the date. It could be next year, it could be 5 years from now. But we pretty much know the fundamentals, and that's a good thing. Like, we know the fundamentals about what we should be doing with the water that's under our feet. We know the fundamentals about what we should be doing with the water that's out in the bay. And I would worry, honestly, less about whether we have 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe 15 years, and just say, let's assume that these systems are going to give us a surprise that we're not going to appreciate, and let's work hard now. Sometimes before you have a crisis, because that just makes life a little bit easier. Even though a crisis has its own momentum and gets people excited to do something, like with most things, I would rather run my life not in a crisis, at least now that I'm old.
I'm laughing because I have 2 big things that I've got to deal with. Changing my septic system, which I have worked on a bit, and I also worry a great deal about power losses. Because in Sandy, which happened, people may not realize it, but it happened in the colder end of October.
Yeah.
And it was freezing in my house, and I was without power for, I would say, I think almost 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was tough. And I had to go stay at people's houses.
Yeah. No,
because I was like, oh my God,
Right.
I'm freezing, So.
Yeah, we're not in the main woods here, but it can be very much like that when that power goes.
Yeah.
And you don't have backup or whatever.
So and that's one of my things that I'm working on, but also I want to get my septic system done as well.
Yep.
And I think that's very important. I think one of the statistics, I guess must have been from you, because you're the go-to guy, that that the growth of Suffolk County from 1950 was, just 250,000, then 660,000, and then 1 million and something, with the least restrictive sewering. The least restrictive. So there were like hundreds of thousands of sewers that needed to be redone.
Yeah, I mean, the rough numbers, they talk about 360,000 systems in Suffolk County basically is, you're basically a hole in the ground. I mean,
Right.
and I will say that, and putting my old health department hat on, there was some method to what was being done in an effort on the drinking water side to try to make sure that drinking water was protected, and efforts to do that, and that's why we have certain zoning that emerged in the 80s, which was more restrictive. And by the way, it was very controversial in its day because the county health department was saying you need an acre's worth of property to be able to have a well and a septic system. And there were a lot of municipalities that are like, who are you, the county health department, to tell us about zoning? It was kind of a big thing. Eventually that came to pass, and we learned that even the acre, depending on where you are and where, we really, at that time, and I was at the county health department in the late 1980s, and so this was kind of a few years into the Article 6 provisions and things like that required this. And it was really about trying to protect drinking water, but then the increasing knowledge about, we can drink, theoretically 10 milligrams per liter under the current standards, although there's a lot of research now that suggests that standard is too high. But, an open water system, coastal embayment can't handle anywhere near that, maybe a milligram, half a milligram. So once you started putting that together, it was like, we have basically set up this system that fixes one problem, but is now, by the time the water gets down, seeps and comes back up, it's created another problem. So, did we do ourselves any favors by not really looking at all of the equation back then? And, I don't blame anybody for that, but it's hard. These systems are complicated. Natural systems they can be baffling, and they can befuddle you, and they're very hard to make public policy around. But now one of the things we know for sure is that we've had roughly 10 years worth of research or more that is telling us that this is a problem. We also have technological fixes that didn't used to exist in terms of the systems you can put in the ground to better denitrify. And we have a tremendous amount of modeling and mapping and research work that is even telling us the amount of nitrogen that we need to get out of various watersheds to be able to see a certain return in healthy productivity. That's great stuff to have, because that allows you to maintain a direction in terms of public policy that's based in the research and the statistics and the fact pattern. And you have a solution that actually has been tested by the county now for several years, and you can pick multiple systems or whatever. But that's all but it's going to take time. It took us a long time to get 360,000 systems in the ground. It's going to take us a long period of time to get, let's say, even half of those out of the ground. And then we'll start. But I think where you're going to see this pivot in the right direction is when you get enough of those systems in a particular watershed, and that water quality begins to show signs of healing. That's going to be very important for people. And I think, it's kind of an odd analogy, but I almost feel like, for the concern and skepticism about this vaccine with COVID, as you got, several million people vaccinated, and more people got vaccinated, and you could see the hospital statistics for people vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And some people will never be persuaded, and I understand that, but there are definitely people who were kind of like, I don't know. Well, that I don't know became much easier for people to be supportive of once there was data and people started seeing how it was playing out over time. And I think that's kind of the same here.
So actually, one of the things that I think we all have to take stock of on our own property is our waste system. There's no two ways about it. It's got to be brought up to date.
Absolutely, and I think one of the benefits that people should realize here is that the state of New York, the county of Suffolk, and the towns of East Hampton and Southampton have programs to help you pay for that. And so people, and we who advocated for this type of thing, did not go into it and say everybody should have to plunk down $20,000 or $15,000, whatever it is. We understood that people had put in systems under the guidance that existed at the time or whatever, and we were equally as committed, and remain so, to helping people afford to do what is the right environmental thing to do in this particular case. And because we have a community preservation fund that's been approved by the voters multiple times, and people understand the value of that, and a portion of that can be used for this, we have a funding mechanism locally here that doesn't exist throughout much of Suffolk County. And added to that, we also have the funding that does exist in Suffolk County, which is the county funding stream and also some state money. So Southampton and East Hampton Town, of any of the towns in Suffolk County, are the best positioned to help people change out those systems and get new systems in the ground. And that's,
You hear that, folks?
yeah, I mean, it's true, right? So if you're on the fence about it, explore that, and you'll see if you go to the Reclaim Our Water website, which is you can start through the process, and then the town also has its own information. So those are ways for people to see that when you do the math, I mean, this is something which is going to be in some cases significantly reduced in cost.
So that's called reclaimourwater.org.
I want to say .org, but I don't remember if it's .org or .gov or .com. I apologize. But if you just Reclaim Our Water, you'll see that. You'll find that site if you put that into your search engine.
And that will help us in funding
Yeah.
to get our changes.
And it helps you to navigate what you need to do at the county level and all that kind of thing. And these systems are starting to go in, so that's good news. We're looking for our office right now to try to move on that. Even though we haven't had anybody in the office for a year, but we want to have a system, as high quality a system as we can. And we're in Southold, so we don't have the benefit of the additional monies that are available, here. But nonetheless, it's still. It's just worth looking. And the other thing is you're adding a piece of valuable infrastructure to your property, which if you have a 50-year-old cesspool and somebody goes to buy your house and they inspect it, people are going to be like, maybe I don't want that, If you have a brand new state-of-the-art system that's treating nitrogen and the thing is, top-notch, that can only help. So we think there's multiple advantages here. And one of the problems we've always had is that your septic system is buried, so it's out of sight and out of mind. And as soon as we change our thinking on that, we'll get more,
Okay, folks, we've got the word. Now we know what we have to do, and let's start to get to it.
Just start.
Because it's important. I mean,
This is a wonderful place that we live.
It's called when you can't drink the water, what you have is nothing.
Well, why do people come here?
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming, Bob. Wonderful, always, always. You give me great hope and a great view of this wonderful area.
Well, it's good to see you. It's good to be back.
Yeah. Take care.